Gesicki's going to return. Same too with Devontae Parker and whatnot. Obviously, it's not going to be a paced-up game, but when those guys are in trouble, Preston Williams is in IR, Jakeem Grant's limited in practice, you kind of do want the guys like Bowden and Matt Collins that'll be running the routes. Let's go to tight end, though. Kelsey is $8K, and I don't think we've ever seen a tight end this expensive. Certainly not in, my initial read from trying to dig into my memory in, DraftKings DFS. So that's wild. But Mark Andrews at 55, TJ Hawkinson at 52, Gronk, Logan Thomas, Gesicki, of course, but he might not play. You said you like tight end this week, so I'll let you lead it from here. What's the spot or spots that you want to go to?
I have a hard time, again, doing the research on the article for the DraftKings $1 million recap article. Kelsey's been a mainstay there. One of the popular strategies that's been going on at the last couple of weeks is doubling up on tight end. So starting a tight end and also in the flex going with a tight end as well. In order for that strategy to work, and it's worked 2 weeks in a row, the winner of the $1 million tournament has done that 2 weeks in a row. Kelsey has been part of that. Waller was a part as well. If you want to go that way, it is a little bit contrarian. But one of the ways that for that strategy to work is you have to have a huge game from a tight end. And so really the only way, especially this week with Waller playing on Thursday, the only way to do that is Kelsey at 8,000. He's, I think, the sixth most expensive. I thought he was fifth, but I think he's the sixth most overall expensive player on the entire slate. So we talk about how you're getting a wide receiver that qualifies a tight end and you're paying for him less. Well, you're not paying for him less anymore. But if you want to take that strategy and go there, I can see how you want to pay up for the 8,000, but I like the cheaper guys. Most of the tight end position is essentially quarterback, is essentially touchdown or bust. There are a lot of guys that I kind of like when the bar is that low. So you look at Dan Arnold. He's terrible. But if all you care about is a cheap price so you can afford things up in other places and you're just hoping for a touchdown, Dan Arnold all of a sudden at 3,500 becomes a great option. Well, great is a stretch because he's not being targeted outside of the red zone essentially. So he's horrible. But again, when you have the bar so low and all you need to do is to save money at the tight end position and hope for anything at all that you can find, all of a sudden a Gerald Everett for the Rams at 3,100, a Graham at 3,100. The guy that I'm big on because it's, again, combining price with just the hope of just something is Cole Kmet of the Bears. He's only 3,000. He's developed. He's getting the targets now for that team. I liked Jimmy Graham coming into the season, but he's not a part of the Bears plan anymore. Cole Kmet has had 7 targets in back-to-back weeks. Not big-time production, 37 receiving yards and 41 receiving yards, but he does have 1 touchdown. At 3,000, again, to win the $1 million tournament in DraftKings, all you needed to do was have a tight end that was so cheap that you could spend the money elsewhere. Cole Kmet fits that strategy pretty effectively. And so if you don't want to pay up for Kelsey, which I'm not a big 2 tight end strategy guy, I'm just on board with skipping Kelsey. Don't pay the $8,000. Put Cole Kmet in there at 3,000, and then you can go get your Henrys, or though you can maybe go get your Browns and your Tannehills or whatever like that. So from that perspective, I like how cheap the tight ends are because, again, there's no demand. All you need is 2 or 3 catches and a touchdown, and the guy becomes at least a viable option. Not an exciting one, but a viable one. The tight end position is just terrible. So having such a low bar makes it easy to be intrigued by a lot of options.
Yeah, those Bears tight ends are interesting. Kmet ran routes on 62% of Trubisky's dropbacks last week. Jimmy Graham was at 41%, and he actually got the touchdown in the red zone. So they're kind of squeezing each other a little bit, but with there being a good overall amount of the Bears passing game pie going to tight end as a whole, I think you are able to make them work. Jordan Reed at 3,200, Hayden Hurst at 33, maybe a couple other guys, although Hurst, you'd like to see Julio back in the fold for. Dallas Goedert, I mentioned a minute ago. Jordan Akins had, just a horrific play where he lost the ball in the sun and should have had an easy touchdown. But if he catches that one, you add, 7.5 points to his total, and he looked fine. So at 2,800, I think the lights are still on for him. Whoever's healthy of the Vikings tight ends can always be involved. And then Jacob Hollister is, not getting a ton of work, but I think the Seahawks could easily get him a touchdown. So if you want to try one of those punt and pray for a TD guys, I think he would be an option. Any final thoughts here, though, on targets and fades before we head into stacking?
You mentioned Goddard. I do like him. If you want to somehow combine actual talent with an affordable price, I think Goddard is actually the perfect mix at 3,900. He can put up a 100-yard game. Like I said, you can't win the $1 million thing on a $1 million tournament with a two tight end strategy unless you have a tight end that catches at least 100 receiving yards and a touchdown or so. So you need a big day from somebody. Goddard can come close to that. He's not a Kelsey. He's not a Waller. But if you need a tight end that can have a good day, 75 yards or more, Goddard can do that. And at 3,900, he's less than half of Kelsey. So if you want to combine the two and just have a decent play at a decent price, I think actually Goddard might be the best play of the day. But I'm going with the savings. I need that $900, so I'm going probably with the punt play on Kmet. But Goddard is probably the better combination.
Yeah, Goddard did have 43 receiving yards in Hurts' first start, and that was basically a quarter of the overall passing yardage that the team had. So certainly still involved even with the QB change. That'll do it for targets and fades. Kick it back over for stacking.
Obviously, stacking an important part of every single DFS lineup, tournaments, cash, otherwise. There's some interesting games this week, and then there are some bad ones. I mean, I don't think you want to be stacking San Francisco at Dallas. I don't know if anyone wants any part of Detroit, though you may want some parts of Tennessee. Miami, New England, to me, that one could get pretty ugly. I'm almost thinking the under is where you want to go there. So get off of the DFS, go over to the sports book and go under on that one. But there are some intriguing players and some intriguing matchups. Teams that maybe aren't that great, but they have a good matchup, like the Bears, for example. It's hard to get excited about Mitchell Trubisky, but throwing against Minnesota is not a bad proposition. Some interesting ones. You can finally have some good quarterbacks. Brady, as our boss Mike Patch always says, somehow he thinks I'm obsessed with Brady, and I am a Patriots fan. But you can finally get him in a lineup maybe this week. You can get Patrick Mahomes in a lineup if you want to spend that kind of money. So there are a lot of intriguing options this week. You got Lamar Jackson if he's ever going to have a monster game this season, it's been a disappointing year. This might be the week. So there are lots of interesting situations here. And then on the flip side of that, you get the Seahawks against Washington. I think everyone always gets excited about the Seahawks because they have been an explosive offense. To me, I'm a little bit nervous. I'm more impressed, I think, than most with this Washington defense and this Washington team. Ron Rivera just seems to get the most out of his players. And while I think the Seahawks are going to score, you got to pay a lot to play Seahawks. And against that Washington defense, I'm not so bullish on that one. So some very interesting stacks or not stacks this week. Let me get your general thoughts there, PD Jags.
Yeah, so, right, I talked about at the top of the show how I wasn't too excited about a ton of spots, but that doesn't mean there isn't anything we could go to. I think the Titans totally make sense here, and you can use a bring back from the lines if you'd like. If you want to include Derrick Henry in a Titans stack, it is viable in this type of situation. Chiefs Saints is a good game overall. I mean, 51.5 is, not a total to scoff at by any means. It's just not sort of in the range that we normally have as one of our top games on a given slate. So I think that can work from either end. Obviously expensive on the Kansas City side. Bucks Falcons, I'd be stacking up the Bucks if I'm doing that. I don't think I'm going with Matt Ryan unless Julio's definitely in and good to go. And even still, probably not too excited about it, but you can run, the Bucks and grab Ridley. Eagles, Cardinals, both sides. I mean, I think both those quarterbacks, obviously you don't need to stack with anyone. You could go skinny stacks too and, just grab a tight end or something like that and, try to get one touchdown. That totally works. And then the Ravens and the Rams are teams where they're forecasted very solid totals in spots where they could run away with the game at home. But there's definitely potential to put something together. So I think I'm probably more inclined with those teams to grab one or two pieces as opposed to, going in with a full stack or a bring back I'm more inclined to do with Jacksonville than the Jets. But I think we do have, at the very least, a handful of spots here that you can consider out of these 11 games to put something together for.
Tell me why there's not a lot of love for the Rams. They're playing the Jets. Obviously, the Jets are just atrocious. And yet, every single week, nobody loves Goff. Everyone's a fan of little Cooper Kupp, as Matthew Berry likes to say. But no one is ever bullish on the Rams, even though McVoy is supposedly an offensive genius. Tell me why we shouldn't be much more bullish on the Rams much more often. I'm bullish on Cam Akers, but that's finally just recent. Why is nobody ever bullish on the Rams? Tell me why, and tell me why they're correct in not being more bullish on the Rams, especially this week.
I mean, there's no doubt that the Rams are a good team. It's just, will you get the fantasy production? And some of the stuff McVay does makes you want to rip your hair out, right? I mean, Goff's had, I think 4 games with 28 plus DraftKings points, or at least 27 plus this year. And some of those are ones where he's been able to get like a QB sneak or whatever, but that's fine. We'll certainly add it to the total, even if they're tough to predict. Like, they had that game against the Seahawks in week 10 where, I felt really good about them, and the pass catchers, bad defense, and they just ran in all their touchdowns. I mean, the Rams are one of the top few teams in terms of red zone rush rate. And so I talked last week about how Aaron Rodgers was really exciting because, whether he's trying to get his MVP or whatever, the Packers are throwing the ball when they're getting close. And so Rodgers is getting a piece of pretty much every Packers touchdown. That is not the case for Jared Goff by any means. And it's a question where, hey, they might score 5 touchdowns, but if Goff only throws 2 of them, he's not paying off his salary at $6,300 because they're not throwing for 450 yards once they build a big lead. And so I think trying to predict where that stuff's going to go, I mean, heck, we could see, tight end around to Gerald Everett, and that helps basically nobody. So I think the issue is, the lack of concentration in this offense and the fact that the running backs are highly involved when they get in close.
Tampa Bay had the Falcons with all the talent on the wide receiver part of those two teams, and the fact that the Atlanta defense was atrocious early in the year. I keep talking about how they're a lot better than people think, at least now, but they're not a good defense. Don't get me wrong, but they're better now than they were early in the season. At least that's my impression. If I'm wrong and the numbers say I'm wrong, then I'll accept that. But my impression, at least, is that the Falcons defense has been better recently. Shouldn't that be a huge stack game? You can have bringbacks on either side. The quarterbacks are affordable because they're not great. They don't have a lot of upside. They don't run. They're 2 of the few statues left in the NFL. But shouldn't that game be a really popular stack game? Shouldn't that one be really high scoring as well? I don't get the sense that it is.
Do you feel good about Matt Ryan, right? Like, Matt Ryan's been bad over the last month. So I said I'm totally good with Brady and the Bucs. You always have the issue with them of trying to predict where the touchdowns are going to go. I mean, Scotty Miller has, 1 catch, 48-yard touchdown. You shouldn't have had him in a lineup, but he happened to score one, and, that throws a wrench in trying to put that stuff together. So it becomes a little bit of an issue when you're trying to pick 2 of, Evans, Godwin, Brown, Miller, Johnson, Gronk, Brate, or whatever. That's frustrating. So I like Brady overall. I think he projects well, but I don't know that I want to be too heavy on them. Ridley's great as a bring back, but I don't think I'm going to be stacking up Matt Ryan these days.
Plus Ridley's expensive. I look at this in this week of all weeks is from a strategic standpoint. To me, the stacking is less important this week maybe than ever. To me, I want to find – because I think you could look at there and you could find stacks. Derek Carr has been in the championship tournament victory lineup 2 weeks in a row. You look at the Bears, and again, I'm not a big Trubisky fan, but they've done okay as far as tournament cashing goes. I remember week 3 or 4, it felt like we had to absolutely have shares of Seattle. I don't see that being the case this week for any team. And that makes for a lot of opportunities. I can see where really strange stacks, or at least less than obvious ones, could actually end up being effective in tournaments. This week, I think more than ever before. So I'm picking guys like Ayuk, who I want to get in a lineup. Kenyon Drake, I think, is a nice price. There are some of these players that I'm actually picking individuals, like Jonathan Taylor. These are players I want to get in lineups. And so I'm building a stack around being able to afford those players rather than finding my stacks and then finding the rest of players to group around. At least that's the way that I was building my team as I was getting ready for this week's podcast.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me sort of viscerally uncomfortable to try to do that whole 9-player parlay thing where I'm just grabbing so many guys that are uncorrelated. So I'll find ways to do, mini stacks and whatnot, and, get overall exposure to the game environments I like. But if you told me that, the top tournament winners this week were, it was Minshew and Colin Johnson running it back with J.K. Dobbins, I wouldn't be surprised at all. As the pricing gets tighter, I mean, you do have to be sort of more creative in terms of how deep you go and weird things you do to be able to free up space, because if Derrick Henry and Tyreek Hill both have slate-breaking days, Well, a lot of people aren't going to be able to find a way to get them both in there. So you're going to have to do something kind of weird to free up that space. And so if you're confident in the top plays this week, then you really do need to take shots on lower level quarterbacks. And again, that's why I'm very inclined to try to go with, Jalen Hurts, Taysom Hill, even I think Kyler Murray is someone that you only need to grab one pass catcher with, as opposed to other guys where generally you want to pack in two. And so I think the running quarterbacks here definitely are good shots.